Hello, everyone. This is another Freedom to Feel conversation, and my guest today is Geoff Thompson. He is psychotherapist and registered social worker who has specialized in working with men in therapeutic environments for the past 8 years. He's also the founder of Logos Therapy Services, and he's a writer as well. I have I have had the joy to read some of his articles, and I have way too many questions now here. I'm so curious about the topic of men, masculinity, money, and mental health. So I guess the full biography will be at the end of this video, as you know, who are following this podcast. So for now, my open question for you, Geoff, is who you are. Who are you in your own words?
Oh man, I was worried about a question like that,
Yes.
actually. Yeah, I mean, I suppose first and foremost, I'm trying my best to be a good helper, a good therapist, trying to be a good steward of this information and this work when it comes to supporting men in vulnerable spaces and helping them to be the best and the healthiest versions of themselves they can be. So I'm trying to be a good steward of that. And I guess I'm a husband and a man myself, so dealing with all the same things that we're probably going to talk about, having my own battles and my own experiences.
Yes. And what inspired you to become a therapist, mainly in a social worker?
Oh, good question. I've always been interested in health, and I would probably say I've always been involved in the health field in some way, shape, or form. I actually started out not as a therapist at all, not in mental health at all. I was working more in the physical health side of things. I did an undergrad degree in kinesiology, and I was really just interested in helping people to become physically healthy. And I
Yeah.
did that for about five years or so before I began to realize that people who were coming in and trying to get healthy, usually the issues weren't physical. It wasn't that
Mm,
they didn't physically have the ability to lose weight or get in shape. It was
yeah.
something psychological. And I started to become just absolutely taken with that idea that if you could actually work with them at a psychological level, then perhaps they would start to get physically healthy. And that kind of brought me back to school again, and
Yes.
as it usually does. So back to school, master's degree in psychology, and here we are.
Wow. I can relate to that. I used to be a personal trainer, and I remember seeing that too with my clients in New York, that they were so emphatic, so focused on physical health that they were not aware of how unhappy they were really psychologically, mentally. And that really didn't bring me to psychology, but brought me to spirituality. And
Right.
that's what my attention has been for the last, oh, pretty much all my life, but for the last 10 years.
Right.
So with that in mind, Geoff, do you have any spiritual practices or views, understandings of yourself in life?
While I'm not really a follower of any specific tradition, you'd be surprised how much therapy and certain forms of spirituality tend to overlap a little bit. Even
Mm,
just the concept of
yes,
mindfulness is
yes.
deeply connected to Buddhism. I spent a good part of 3 years trying to study Buddhism and mindfulness, meditation, and found a great deal of inspiration from reading, Mark Epstein and a few other writers like that. And it's wonderful to bring that into your practice.
Anything that can help us, right, to see ourselves and this experience called life more
Yeah.
clearly. I love that idea that we can just kind of live in a more peaceful way. But you see, I usually don't say happiness because I
Mm,
don't. Yeah, for some reason, happiness is not a goal, but peace, being at peace with what is happening inside and outside of me. That's
yeah.
really the goal. If there is a goal with all this.
What I typically say in session is that happiness is fleeting, but conquering your fears is forever. So that's a much more fulfilling drive usually than. And hey, if you can feel happy along the way, great. But
Right, right. That arises, right? From peace or from actually, I don't think we can we become fearless? I think we could, right? And not maybe not at the biological level. That's right. Survival mechanisms will be activated. They are activated all the time. But from a psychological point of view, I believe we can become fearless, can't we, Jeff?
I guess it depends on how you define fearless. I mean, I agree with you in the sense that I think there are some biological drives. We have this lizard part of our brain that we just, no matter how much meditation we throw at it, no matter how much, therapy we do, it's going to be there. And it's there for an important reason.
Right.
We need that or else we wouldn't survive. But I do think that it's very possible, if not actually important, integral to living a fulfilling life, is you have to have the ability at the very least to look the things that scare you dead in the eye and be willing to face them. If you can't do that, that's usually where people become rather unhappy and unfulfilled in their life. It's not that they're lacking usually in material possessions or accomplishments. It's the things that they just they didn't do because they were scared.
That's true. That is so
Hmm.
true. Fear, that's another incredibly interesting topic. And I won't go there, but I will kind of ask you another open question about mental health. How do you define mental health these days?
I would probably describe mental health as probably going back into even just talking about the things that are scary or that scare you. Is if you have the ability to live your life the way you want to without having to make a lot of excuses or compromises, and willing to do things that are very uncomfortable. I think that that's a good sign of mental health, whatever it actually is, like in an absolute sense. I think that having that ability is a really good indicator of what it could be.
Yeah, that's a good point. See, being comfortable with the uncomfortable, that sounds very interesting to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And most of us kind of love the idea that we can be comfortable all the time or happy all the time.
Yeah, that's a pathway to being probably quite miserable and not having a lot of friends, actually.
Being comfortable all the
Yeah.
time.
Well, if you think about it, that idea of being comfortable with in discomfort. I mean, really, the only way to actually have, like, I'm connecting it to the idea of relationships, but the reality is, if you can't get uncomfortable, if you can't engage in conflict, if you can't tell somebody, hey, you did this thing and it upset me, and I don't think you did that on purpose, but I just need you to know. If you don't have the ability to do that, well, one of two things is going to happen. I mean, one, you're either going to, have a certain depth of a friendship that's not going to be really satisfying. You're not going to really ever be able to trust that person. Or two, at some point in time, the relationship is just going to dissolve. It's just going to go away. So it's actually, yeah, it's so important to be able to lean into discomfort in practical and helpful ways.
Yes, I love that kind of practice. It is one for me. For some reason, women, we have I don't know, we were brought up that way, perhaps, with this
Mm.
idea that we are supposed to be always nice and smile, look pretty and all that.
Hmm.
Don't express yourself when it comes to conflicts. That has
Yeah.
been my understanding, the way I was educated. And that just I paid a high price for it. Like to this day, I'm still
Hmm.
working on boundaries. Not easy to say no when I mean to say no.
Women have a unique battle with this idea, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, the psychological research, and I know this is a really um, this is such a common thing to talk about in the sphere, about how agreeableness will shape the arc of a relationship a lot. And on average, women do tend to score much higher on agreeableness, and which is something I actually feel a little bit of empathy for. Even in my own personality test, I score off the charts in agreeableness. So it
Ah,
makes setting boundaries very difficult. But the average, female is going to be, so much more agreeable, and it's going to make expressing yourself, being honest, setting boundaries so much more difficult.
that's sad, isn't it? In a way.
Well, it comes with positivities too. It comes
Yeah.
with pros. It's not, women tend to experience much less loneliness than men do. This is something that I see again and again. The average guy that I work with has, maybe if he's lucky, one very close friend. that he can really say, I rely on this person to be there for me if I need. Whereas, the average woman that I speak to, it's usually somewhere between 3 and 5 that they could probably point to. So that agreeableness, while it does, it's not all negative. And I actually wish that more of that was talked about. Like, while
Yeah.
you lose out on the ability to, maybe set appropriate boundaries from time to time, but your abilities to create meaningful, lasting relationships is something I find myself talking to men about all the time, trying to say, hey, like, let's focus on being more tactful and thoughtful,
Yeah, I love that. Talk to me about the mission of the
Mm,
Logos Therapy Services. Did you set an intention?
absolutely. So I spent the starting part of my career, I was very, very lucky to get a practicum, and then was then hired on at the time, was only one of two not-for-profit centers that exclusively worked with men, and was publicly funded. So it had free services. We did some very, very unique programs there that had very only seldom had been tried in other areas. And it was such an amazing learning experience. And unfortunately, as is the way with a lot of not-for-profit centers, at least in Canada, where I'm working, funding gets moved around, funding gets changed. So that center eventually folded and moved somewhere else, which was very sad.
Right.
But I knew that I wanted to continue that work in some way, shape, or form. I wanted to try to create something, this time in the private sector. I wanted to try to create something that could bring as much of that energy as possible, and try to specialize in working with men, but also trying to encourage just people to talk more about masculinity and the issues that men face in this sphere, and in the times that we're living in.
Oh, wow. How wonderful. When I read about it, I was really excited about having this conversation because that's unique. And it is. I don't
Yeah.
often talk about these topics. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
Um, so the article, you sent me two articles to read that you have
Yes.
written: Money and the Immature Masculinity, Celebrating the Immature Masculinity, Part 2.
Mm.
So there you explore what comprises immature masculinity, which the abbreviation is IM. You often use that throughout the
Hmm.
article, and how we work on correcting it.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. The main, I would say the main differences between immature masculinity and mature masculinity.
Yeah, a lot of what people, at least the way that I like to talk about it with clients or with people that are curious about it, I'm trying to talk about it through the lens of what a lot of people would maybe describe as like toxic masculinity. I try to talk about it more from the perspective of no, no, no. These are just immature expressions of masculinity. These are, and immature doesn't necessarily just mean bad or you know terrible, evil. It doesn't mean those things. It literally just means underdeveloped. It's something that is supposed to be going through a metamorphosis. It's supposed to be something that's going through an arc of change and growth. And when we, unfortunately, so much of our society these days, we are hyper fixated, and we actually value a lot of things that I would say fall into the realm of the immature. Like we talk so much about pursuing personal pleasures. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. Personal pleasures are wonderful. I have an espresso machine at home. I love making my coffee every morning. It's wonderful. But if that's my sole desire in life, is to just only be making sure that I am drinking the greatest espresso every morning, I mean, I'm missing out on such a huge chunk of life. And as we start to kind of journey more so towards the mature side of life, like really and truly, the mature side of life, we're trying to say, well, no, it's not just about me. It's not just about my journey or my personal pleasures. How can I give back? And this is one of the most important distinctions between the immature expressions of masculinity. And this could be just about human beings, not even just about men. I think
Right.
there's absolutely an expression of immature femininity that is out there. Absolutely, just as much as there's an expression of mature femininity as well. So when you're really talking about the immature masculine, you're really like, first and foremost, it's this like, approach that is centered solely on me, not wanting to give back. And it's a very short-sighted view. Immaturity in general, it's very much focused on what is in the here and now, what's good for me now, not necessarily, 10 years from now. And that's where it usually suffers, and it suffers a great deal.
Wow. Ah. I'm like, gosh, listening to you about these things is just so amazing because that makes me think about always goes back to spirituality, which has to do with timeless wisdom and what is good, beneficial
Yeah.
for me and others at the same time. That's
Hmm.
how, I mean, that's what I call spiritual intelligence.
Hmm.
So it's very similar, isn't it?
Well, so much of it is circular if you think about it. Like you can kind of see how these arcs can play out over great lengths of time. If you're someone who never thinks about yourself, you don't take care of yourself, and therapists are particularly bad for this. We have
Ah,
to work really hard at
yeah,
it because
yeah.
we're trying to be of service. But if that's all you're doing, well, you burn out, and eventually you can't give back to other people. And I'm not, and I would even say, I don't even know how mature that is. you have to, you have to be really careful about it. But the classical idea of immaturity would be that, because if you think about children, for example, and they're probably the best example of this, though, they don't really have a choice. Children don't have the ability, they don't have the cognitive structures available to really think outside their own experiences. It's such a classic way of thinking about it. And then slowly, as they get older and their psyche evolves, and they get a prefrontal cortex, and they can actually start thinking critically, hey, now we should start to think about other people, and grow in that way. But there is a circular nature to it, where you can absolutely come full circle and say, look, what is good for other people is good for me. Taking care of myself also allows me to give back even more. It allows me to be even better at doing those things.
Right. And that's so true. Is that what you call balance? Do you call it balance or do you use a different name for that?
Yeah, I think that's a great word to use. If you have balance in life, I mean, you're ideally going to be able to have good access to taking care of yourself, and you're going to have great abilities to be present to take care of other people.
Yes, so true.
Hmm.
The other day I asked my husband about what is another word for balance? Like, what is,
Mm,
how do you see balance? He said, love. Love is
mm.
balance to me.
Yeah, love comes up a lot in therapy. If a saying I'll sometimes use if someone's struggling to grasp the concept. We were talking about boundaries a little bit earlier. Sometimes I'll describe like boundaries are love. You wouldn't allow somebody that you love to hurt you, right? You wouldn't allow, intentionally or unintentionally. You wouldn't allow that. So, you want to continue loving them. You want to continue being in a loving relationship with them. That's got to be the ultimate goal. So boundaries facilitate that. You know.
So true, Jeff. I love the work you do because it's directly connected to women. If men
Mm,
can find their way back into healing, into wisdom, into meaningful living, then we're also helping women. I mean, we're just helping. It's interesting. By helping ourselves, we are helping others, aren't we? If we engage with healing, then it's
yes.
easier to pass that on.
This is probably one of the most important things to talk about when it comes to men, because it's also deeply misunderstood. There is such a craving right now, especially with the men that I'm talking to. Albeit I'm doing it on a pretty small scale. Like I'm in the trenches right now. I'm working with people one on one. There's only so many hours in a day, but I've been doing it for almost a decade now. I'm getting close to that, and there's just such a deep yearning for men to connect with something that has been long since forgotten. This idea of what is a healthy man, what is a mature man, and a lot of that is actually kind of being villainized today. Like so much of our myths that describe healthy men and healthy masculinity is all about, kings and knights and warriors and great sacrifice, and these are all things that we don't celebrate today at all. We don't celebrate men standing in their own light. We don't celebrate men becoming powerful. We think that they will immediately become tyrannical. And I'm not naive to the reality that lots of men have behaved very badly, and there absolutely is an archetype for that. And I explore it a lot.
Yeah.
But if we fear the whole thing, we start to get into a bit of a baby and bathwater situation, and those don't usually work out very well. So it's so important to recognize that men healing, men becoming, dare I say, more manly, or embracing more of their masculinity, is probably the best thing for women, the women who love men and want to be in relationships with men. I mean, we're talking about things that are just so critical to the health of a society and the health of a culture.
Yes, that's true. It's directly connected, those two things. Yeah, I was not aware of that, but I guess I'm becoming aware now as listening to you. That is true. Um, I for some reason something in me arised when my husband's working like in projects, big projects and
Hmm.
stuff. There's a possibility for him to make a lot of money. So something in me automatically goes into almost the healing mode of, oh, I need to guide him a lot more into healing. So if he gets there, he knows how to use money in a way that can help other people, help
Hmm.
everyone to grow. So do you think that's coming from fear, that something in me is kind of fearful that he could become go into that kind of power that has to do with manipulation, control, and abuse?
I mean, I wouldn't want to, be too heavy-handed in how I look at that. You and I have only been talking for, about 30 minutes or so. But
Yeah.
but what I do typically ask people, a good place to start, and I'm sure you're not alone, in this at all. And I think the first thing that you want to ask yourself is, okay, both presently, but maybe even more so importantly, like historically, what is my relationship with men? What type of models did I have growing up? You know, were they centered? Were they grounded? Did I have a father figure or a grandfather figure? Was anybody, any men in my life that showed me what it was like to have such immense power? You know, the masculine psyche, the masculine body, the biology of the masculine, especially when I speak to women about this, I will ask this question: have you seen any man in your life demonstrate some form of restraint when they could do insane amounts of damage or harm and didn't? Have you ever
Mm.
seen that? Because if you haven't, and I think that this is where I would empathize with you, Valeria, in the sense that if say for example, and I'm not saying that this is you, but if you haven't seen that, I would totally understand why you might think, oh, I need to jump in and correct what he's doing, because it's a way of you also securing safety for yourself and feeling secure in the relationship. And it's actually quite important to just be mindful of that and to do some of that exploration.
Yes, that's a good point. So we need to go, yeah, deeper into it.
Yeah.
Right. I guess because, yeah, I usually don't refer to the past as much, although I have been to a lot of traumatic situations as a child, abuse and
Hmm.
all that. Yes, and I didn't have the mature masculine figure. I have not been exposed to that. Not that I can remember.
So few people have. I had such a fascinating experience recently. I'm quite blessed to be married to a good woman, and we got into an interesting conversation with some friends of ours where, they were very casually, using the words patriarchy and toxic masculinity and not knowing what I do, and uh, but it occurred to me in that moment that my wife hadn't really. I had never really listened to her views on this and what her perspective was.
Yeah.
And she had such a fascinating moment there where she kind of, looked at this couple and said, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't understand where you're getting this. And it occurred to me in that moment. So my wife had a stable and healthy father figure who did everything he possibly could to not just give her a good life, but to protect her. She also had an exceptional grandfather, an
Ah.
exceptionally wonderful grandfather who was present and protected and showed her all kinds of love and tolerance and compassion. And it occurred to me in that moment, right, like, that's how that happens. you know, she doesn't worry about those kinds of things. She, and not to put her on a pedestal or anything, but it really revealed to me in a moment, well, if you haven't seen that, it's so easy to start, unconsciously, unintentionally projecting that out into the
Right.
world and to think, right, well, this is what all men must be like. And it's so not true. It couldn't be further from the truth. But I absolutely would empathize as to how someone would land there. But it is important to take a step back and acknowledge, right, why might I be thinking that? Because it can't be true of the whole world. It just can't be.
Right. Yes, yes. That's beautiful though that your wife had this wonderful role model because
Yeah,
that changed everything. The
it really
way, right? The
does.
way you perceive life and see others in the world. Yeah, my had to do engage in a lot of healing to be at the point that I am now.
Yeah.
Being able to see uh, the differences and not of what's immature, what is not, and not judging, and kind of being
Hmm.
receptive, being open to it, and trying to help guide somehow, which it is. I feel it's what I'm doing now with my husband, with a lot of kindness, but very much aware because I'm exposed to a lot of people like yourself as well. A lot of men who are incredible. I mean, I just admire them for what they do alone, healing themselves and passing beautiful messages like this forth. So, so I can see that in the end, the mature man will do exactly that, will
Yeah.
contribute to their own health and then pass that on, try to benefit other people in the same way.
The mature masculine, if I had to describe it, in the most concise way possible, is a man who is aware of his own power, is aware of how much benevolence and malevolence he can exert on the world and make conscious choices for the betterment.
Mm,
And
yeah,
this is so deeply rooted in our myths. There's a reason why Lord of the Rings was so popular. There was a
yes,
reason why King Arthur and these very like epic myths are just things that people crave to be a part of because they exemplify that. They exemplify what it means to be a good king, to be a good leader, to be a good man.
true. I love that definition, though. That's one that resonates with me, of course. And I always go back to spirituality because I interview a lot of people, some people that made a huge impact on me on archetypes.
Hmm.
So going deeper into it, and of course I talk to psychologists all the time, and
Yeah.
and then I'm like, oh my god, all these different kinds of ways of expressing ourselves in this human experience. There's so many ways. So, but what is one a guiding principle that I can hold, can hold all this together? This, which I call I, which is this
Hmm. Hmm.
multiplicity of personalities of expressions that I don't even know what they come from a lot of times, the thoughts that arise. So my anchor has been what we are and not who we are. So that really keeps me grounded. What am I? And
Hmm.
the answer is always one. It's one reality. So seeing the interconnectedness of everything keeps me very grounded.
Hmm.
And that's why my focus is always spirituality because it's such a powerful way of looking at the world, at myself and the world, the body mind complex and the world. I don't know. That really makes a huge difference for me. But
Hmm.
I see that the archetypes are very interesting. I mean, the more I talk about it, the more interesting it become.
Well, I think you can. One of the things that I observe so much in the therapy office, and when I'm listening to people that are coming in, and whether they really think they've got everything figured out, or whether they're totally lost, really what they're describing is some kind of fracturing that has happened within themselves. Sometimes
Mm,
that's coming from past trauma. Sometimes that's coming from present trauma. Sometimes that's coming from a big surprise, something they didn't see coming. And but really the at the heart of it is it's a fracturing of who they are, and they're really struggling to kind of put those pieces together. The reason why the work of Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, these two mythologists and depth practitioners, they wrote this amazing book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, back in the 90s, and it was based off of so much fabulous research and time that was spent listening to people like Carl Jung, and they started to emerge this idea of there are aspects within the deep psyche that they called archetypes that all men connect to, and I think all people connect to, perhaps in
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
ways. This is where it gets infinitely complex. But one of the ways that I like to kind of help clients and help men try to heal that fractured nature of it is to connect to the energies of these archetypes. Like, you can't talk about healthy masculinity without talking about the king. The king archetype is so pivotal to the healthy expression of masculinity that it's almost like you can't talk about it without mentioning the king. And you can see it all across cultures. When we have healthy kings, we have a healthy society. When healthy kings have healthy queens, and they
Yes.
go on and they create healthy societies, and they encourage other men to become healthy and to find their own kings within themselves. But it's incredibly complex, and it's not easy. It's not easy work to do. You have to be willing to, you have to be willing to embrace your warrior side, and warriors have to explore the concept of vulnerability. How vulnerable we can be, whether that's literally like on the battlefield, or whether that's talking to your spouse about, something that you're really scared about, you know yeah, or a good there's a reason why characters like Merlin were so important in these ancient myths. They represent the magician archetype. In our modern era, this more refers to our degrees of competence. There's not a single man that I've spoken to that has shared, every single man I talk to cares so much that their partner thinks that they're smart, that they're capable. They don't have to be geniuses, they don't have to be rocket scientists. They just want to be seen as capable. It's one of the most misunderstood things about men. When they're trying to solve an emotional problem, and I work on that with men sometimes, to say, listen, like, she just doesn't want you to fix this. You just need to listen. That's important. But in the reverse part of it, in the realm of the magician, the reason why he's doing that, it's how he deeply cares. He wants to help. That's all he wants to do. He might be doing it in an unhelpful way, and he might not know that, and it's good to kind of work with him on that. But it's so misunderstood. And the final one that they talk a lot about, that being, the lover archetype, which is so critical for healthy masculinity because it directly connects to your relationship to the feminine. So many men have a damaged relationship to the feminine. We talk a lot about absentee fathers in this culture, and it's a very important topic. But what we don't talk enough about is this connection to the mother archetype, and that men are coming out of single family homes, or they're coming out of abusive households where the
Yeah.
mothers inflicted immense amounts of damage on their sons. They go out into the world and they don't trust women, and they do not trust the feminine archetype. And they have one of two options in that way. They can try to control it, and that's not good. You don't want that. That's a bad place to be. Or they can try to disown it. They can pretend as though, I don't need this, I'm fine without them. And you're not. You're
Yes.
not.
Yeah. True.
You will, you might get away for a little while, and your life might be a little more simple. That's fine and fair, but you're not going to be any happier. And it's so important for men to, just as I kind of suggested to you earlier, like, explore the historical relationship that you have with men, with the men that I'm supporting. I ask them to do the same thing, but in the opposite direction, to say, what has been your relationship with the feminine? Has it been nurturing, or has it been harming? When you were in pain, did you have a mother figure in your life who actually was nurturing and compassionate? Or was she ambivalent? It teaches you so much.
Yeah, knowing the backstory, right? That what informs our thoughts and the way we perceive life. That's for sure. I have a question for with the archetypes. So there are many of them, right? I heard
Mm.
about thousands even. I could not believe,
Oh, for
like,
sure.
wow, I didn't know it's too many. I mean, that's incredible. But it's still, if because what's the population of the world now,
Oh,
Geoff? Is that 8
7
billion?
billion, 8
7
billion, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So it's still predictable in a way.
Hmm.
So if we have 1,000, even or 2,000, it's still that means we can predict personalities and behaviors in a way. Maybe the combination might be, yeah, it might become a lot more complex when they are different kinds of archetypes. They're just overlapping. But the question that I want to ask is how do you guide somebody and even yourself to make peace or coming into harmony with all these archetypes? Do you have to get to know each one of them first? What's the process of bringing harmony to that realm?
No, it's a really good question. And I don't think that there's necessarily one specific way. I mean, one of the ways that I have tried to work with men, and I mean, I definitely focus on, the big four, the king, the warrior, the magician, and the
Yeah,
lover,
yeah,
are the ones that I really like to focus on. But the first thing that you have to ask yourself, and if you'll pardon my language, like where do you suck?
yeah,
Where are you not good? I have lots of men who are amazing warriors. They are strong, not just physically, but emotionally. They're strong men. But oh my gosh, in the lover department, they are so inept. They have no idea. They don't know how to talk to women. They don't know how to, and they're scared. Like it's one of the areas that induces fear in them.
yeah.
And it's almost surprising, to kind of, they'll step into an octagon, and they'll just, beat someone to a bloody pulp. But then you ask them to go and sit and talk to a woman at a coffee shop, and the blood drains from their face. It's just, it's insane. But you could start by doing that. Like, yeah, where are you really struggling? Conversely, on the other side, you can have someone that'll come in. I'll have someone come into my office, and oh, no, all their friends are women. They are just no problem talking to women whatsoever. Lots of girlfriends, lots of very successful relationships. Don't have two pennies to rub together. Don't have any ability to actually be generous. They have completely forgotten how to actually develop the part of them that is a provider, that is a caregiver outside of the realm of emotion. And whether and nothing but respect to women out there, but I mean, I haven't met a lot of women that want a masculine partner that is not able to provide in some way, shape, or form. Like, it is important whether we want to admit it or not. So in their magician archetype, where they're trying to develop some form of competency, they've really struggled in that area. So it is about doing the not so fun, not very sexy work
Yes.
of saying, look, like, how are we going to get you invested in a mission of some kind? It doesn't have to be, managing a big hedge fund and making millions of dollars. That's another, absurdity out there. Get into something that you take seriously. You could be a janitor for all I care. It doesn't really matter. But if you can actually demonstrate the desire to progress, to grow, to be better at something every day, that's a very attractive quality.
Right. So true.
Mhm.
And a question that's coming to me is
Mhm.
trauma. And what's the connection between the archetypes and trauma?
Uh, so yeah, really good question. Trauma, you could say, and I'll take the example of a childhood trauma just for a moment.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
something goes wrong in childhood, so something happens that shouldn't happen, or something that should happen doesn't. That's probably one of the easiest ways to describe trauma, especially in childhood. What it will do is essentially shut down your connection to a specific archetype. That might be one way of trying to describe it. Let's say, for example, you're a young boy and you've got a mother that is just emotionally really immature or inept, is not able to actually connect with you in the way that you need. So when you need to feel safe, she's not able to do that. When you need a hug, she tends to go into a different room. you know well, what ends up happening is you are learning in that childhood state that, well, okay, so you're the only woman that I know of any substance, any consequence in my life, and I can't trust you. I can't trust you with my deepest vulnerabilities, and you're never more vulnerable than when you're a child. The only thing that comes second to that is when you're in an interpartner relationship, okay, as a man anyways, with your feminine partner. So essentially what that trauma is going to do to you, especially as you start to grow up and you start to go into your adult relationships. Well, one of the most important things you're going to learn is that, well, the second I'm vulnerable, the second that I am scared, or the second that I need something, I need some kind of emotional presence, the last place I'm going to go to is a woman. That is a bad, bad decision for me. I'm only going to be hurt or abandoned. And that can start to develop in all kinds of ways. So it begins to shut you off from all of this healing energy, from all of these, all of these, quite frankly, like relationships that you could get into and heal them, heal
Right.
these wounds. But what you're going to do instead, and I see this again and again, is you are going to attract the wrong kind of woman. You're going to attract the kinds of women that are more familiar to you, you know? And it leads to a deepening of that wound because now you become this self-fulfilling prophecy, like mom wasn't there for me, so I learned that lesson. I go into adulthood, I
Right.
attract all of these, these feminine partners that hurt me, don't care about my emotional wounds. The second I'm vulnerable, they dismiss me, and I just re-deepen it. So I just kind of keep confirming the same thing, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth. If you are willing to face that, so to try, I know I'm taking a pretty long way of answering your question, but the first thing that you've got to do is you have to face that trauma. You have to face the fact, yeah, hey, listen, mom wasn't there for you. And that really sucks. It was awful and it was wrong that that happened to you. But guess what? The first thing that we can do is recognize that that happened, that it was wrong. And then secondarily, we can begin to talk about, well, what is actually healthy about the feminine? What is it that you actually want? When you were a little kid, what did you really need? Well, what I really needed was mom to give me a hug and say it's going to be okay. That doesn't actually change when you're an adult.
Right. Yeah.
You still
Yeah.
need that from time to time. Maybe the language needs to change. Maybe the problems are more complex. When I left my stable job working at the not-for-profit center because the mission wasn't aligned with me anymore, and I opened up my practice here. Oh, let me tell you, I sure needed some reassurances from my wife that things were going to be okay. But if I didn't feel like that was safe for me to do, like would have made an already very difficult thing to do so much harder. And this is the story of just so many people in our culture. So it starts like, so that's how trauma really kind of impacts us. It cuts us off from these archetypes that can lead us towards the healing that we need. you know Part of the journey is reconnecting with it. When you do that, hey, life suddenly becomes a lot more fun to be in.
Haha, true. Wow. Yeah, that's a beautiful answer, though. One that I'm familiar with, of
I
course.
hope I answered this.
Yeah, really, really well. Yes, yeah, that's very clear to me. I guess the question that comes to mind now, I mean, I have too many questions for you here, Jeff. Oh my gosh, all the ones that I didn't ask. But
Mm,
do you work with teenagers? With that's because I'm almost like I'm thinking about addressing those issues early
mhm.
enough so they don't suffer in adulthood or don't pass that on for too long.
Yeah, I mean, working with youth is something that it requires very specific skills. I've personally chosen
Yeah.
to specialize in working more with adults, but I have worked with kind of the youngest I'll work with is 16. That's
Yeah.
usually the youngest that I work with. It's the realm that I know the best. But there are people out there that are trying to work with children. However, here's the thing, and this is a personal opinion, so please, you and your listeners take it for what it's worth. I would probably encourage it to not make it the youth's problem. If something is going wrong, and it's not all about blaming parents, I'm not trying to do that, but it is. I would encourage parents, if you have a child that you're struggling with, maybe it's not a bad idea for you to do some inward reflection, to step back, to say, okay, look, like they're just responding to me. They're just taking their notes from me and my partner and their environment. They're trying to adapt as best they can to the world that is set out in front of them. Are you helping that, or are you making that more difficult, whether you realize it or not? I don't think I don't think anybody's trying to harm children intentionally. I think, and there's only a small minority of people that are really trying to do harm to children intentionally, but the vast majority of people are just doing the best they can. And I have all the empathy in the world for those parents out there, because it is not
Yeah.
easy. It is
Hmm.
not easy. And, I know it can feel like a daunting task to have a therapist like myself sitting here and saying, okay, look, like, you do some more work. Like, I don't want to be, I don't want to be intolerant to that whatsoever. However, I do believe in the importance of looking internally first. What type of environment am I creating? Is my marriage okay? Is there stress between me and my partner? Am I present enough? Am I coming home after work? Am I excited to see my kids? Or am I so stressed out and I just can't, I can't think until I've got that first rye and Coke in my hand, that, before I can actually sit down and be present with my kids. That can change a child's life so much more than bringing them to a therapist, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, I love your wisdom. Yes, it resonates with me. Right, because all healing, it really starts with us. If you want to see the world a better place, a peaceful place, we need to
Hmm.
resolve the conflicts here. Absolutely.
Couldn't agree
Um,
more.
just to your point, I just want to make a comment about, because I have been abused physically,
Hmm.
emotionally as a child.
Yeah.
Um, I talk to a lot of people here on the topic, and some of us agree and some of us disagree. But I,
Hmm.
I I really resonate these days with the idea that if you have to close your doors to behave in a certain way, that means you know what you're doing, because you don't
Mm.
want to be seen. You don't want other people to kind of know what you're doing. That was the case with my parents, and was the case with a
Mm.
lot of people, women and men who have been abused.
Mhm.
That happened to them, and they strongly, some of them say that. No, I disagree. They did not do the best that they could do. They
Mm.
actually knew what they were doing. So I don't know, Jeff, if I think that way about yeah, when I think about my parents, I talk to them and all, they
Mhm.
live in Brazil and I live here in the United States, and I talk to them
Right.
on the phone, but I don't think I would want it to be next to them. I don't want to be physically, my body
Mhm.
would not want that to happen, because there's something in me says that they are not healed yet. They have not,
Mhm.
they don't know what they are doing, although they
Yeah.
think they do. So it's, yeah, it's a sad reality, isn't it?
You're asking a really important question, and this comes up a lot. When anytime you're working with someone who's experienced some kind of trauma in childhood, probably the easiest question to ask is why.
Yeah.
Like, why did this happen? Why did they choose to do that? Couldn't they see the harm that was being done to me? Couldn't they see how upset I was? And I guess my way of trying to interact with what you've said there is, like, it's so insanely complicated. And first of all, nothing makes it okay. When we talk about people doing their best, it doesn't make poor decisions that they made okay,
Right.
or excusable. That's sometimes where the complication comes in. Just, it's not,
Yeah.
the conversation doesn't end with, oh, they did the best they could. Oh, okay.
Yes, right. Right. Right.
Like, no, of course not. It's a starting point. It's ideally, it's a starting point to say, right, this is where they started. They started with doing the best that they could. But guess what? Some people's best really sucks. you know, sometimes someone's best is far, far below what it should be. But if you can accept that as a starting point, and I'm not saying that that's easy. Sometimes it's a couple of years in therapy just to arrive at that place. But then after that, ideally what you can start to do is you can say, okay, look, like, what were the boundaries that would have been really, really helpful if you had an adult mind in a child's body and you could communicate with your parents the way that, say, for example, you and I are communicating right now.
Yes.
Well, what would you say to them? you know well, hey, look, when you hit me when you're upset, that's not okay. You can't do that. Don't hit me. Can't you see how upset I am? Right. That's obviously impossible. That's never going to happen, but it's an important exercise to walk yourself through, right? Because it reminds you to say, right, what they did was wrong. It doesn't make it okay. The abuse wasn't okay. whether they knew what they were doing was wrong or not. Yeah, but it's so complicated because a person's best can unfortunately still create an insane amount of trauma
Yes.
and pain. You know,
Yes. Yes.
this is why, if you talk about coming from spirituality, and I think it's so important for people to have a connection to something bigger than themselves. It doesn't matter what it is. You need to find something in your life that you can connect to. I don't think that deep atheism it offers anything to people in a grand sense. I don't believe that, and I'm open to exploring that on some other podcast. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that sometimes what can happen, I don't know if this has ever been your experience, but I think sometimes what can happen when spirituality goes wrong is it kind of creates this illusion that, well, it's done now. It's done. I have achieved this thing. I have released that thing that happened to me. And quite frankly, I think that can be a mistake. I think that can actually shut us off from, potentially realizing where some of our blind spots are. You know, Even myself, I find sometimes I study this stuff pretty rigorously, and I read rigorously, and I listen to people that I respect, and I still find myself making mistakes that, you know, I wish I hadn't made. Let's just say that, I got to catch myself. You're never done. You're never done. It's a constant evolution you got to go through as a human being.
Yes, yeah, I agree. That's beautifully said. Yeah, that spirituality can become, uh, they call it, I think it's spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, and hey, like it's real and it does more harm than you think it does, and it disconnects you from people that you thought, hey, they would totally get this.
Yeah, that's true. That was my case too in the very beginning. I've been always interested in spirituality, perhaps because
Mhm.
that was my curiosity.
Yeah.
As a child, I was trying to make the situation, I was not trying to make the situation better because I couldn't anyway, but I was trying to rationalize the whole thing. And I remember thinking, maybe
Mhm.
when I was about 7 years old, eight, that it was not necessary. They they could do this differently. They could address the
Mm.
situation differently. If I drop this spoon on the floor, they don't have to hit me for that. So that was
Mhm.
my way of thinking that it could have been different, but I didn't
What
know
you're
how.
what you're starting to talk about there, which is also another deeply important concept to get into in therapy, is attachment. You know,
Yeah.
Attachment is something that is so critical in understanding. Like I'll sometimes summarize it to say, look, if you want to know why something's going wrong in your relationship, understand what's going on with your attachment wounds. You know, Attachment theory is this. I hope I'm not explaining something that you're super familiar with, but um, you know, we have this like psychobiological social drive in us from the time we're born to the time we die to bond with other people. That's it. It's that simple. And sometimes when I'm trying to explain it, I'll ask a client, like, why do you think babies smile? Well, it's because you smile back, right? You are
Mhm.
endearing yourself to your caregiver. Babies can't do anything for themselves. All they're trying to do is bond, bond, bond. Take care of me, feed me, protect me. That's all they need, because otherwise they die. And that drive is so powerful, like you can't shut it off. So when something is going wrong in childhood, you've got parents that are hitting you, you've got parents that neglect you, you literally don't have the ability, especially like young ages, like what you and I are talking about, like around 7, you don't have the ability to step back and think, maybe this is their problem.
Yes, right.
You can't do that. All you can do is say, well, it must be me. Maybe I'll change my behavior. Maybe I'll try not to drop that spoon. I'll have a death grip on that spoon,
And I
so
lived
that.
in fear. Yeah, that was fear.
Right. Absolutely. And so, when you understand, so attachment, kind of coming back to that, when you understand how you responded to it, it will tell you so much about how you can make changes and heal in adulthood. you know. So it's such an important thing to pay attention to. And attachment is a, big concept. I don't know how much time we've got, but like it's, I would encourage anybody to like do your research on it, understand it, because it will tell you so much.
Yes, yeah. I have interviewed a lot of psychologists about attachment
Hmm.
styles. Yeah, there's it's a lot to talk
Yeah,
about that for sure.
absolutely.
But thank you for bringing it to the conversation. We're almost at the
Yeah.
end. I know I could talk to you forever. I would love to have you back so we
Oh,
can just
thank you so
explore other
much.
topics. But I guess that just to close that, what I was trying to get at, I guess, is that with that in mind, I kind of walked through life, tried to understand what, yes, of course, so much was happening that I couldn't understand. Then therapy was not my path for some reason. So I chose
Hmm.
spirituality always. And then in the end, what I found out is that all basically the suffering that we go through, the self-inflicted and the suffering that we pass on is coming from ignorance, which
Mm.
knowledge is the antidote to it. So I need to understand now, so what kind of knowledge will it will end ignorance? It in a way simplifies the whole human experience when it comes to suffering for me. But I find it fascinating how for some people this is not the path, and I see for most people
Hmm.
science is it's the way to go. Is we live in a society that is informed by science. It is very much interested, fascinated by
Hmm.
science, and everything. Every time we talk about spirituality, becomes almost like a side dish.
Hmm.
Okay, this is something that could heal, it could do this, but and for me, it's the main course. It's like what I really ground myself in this. Okay, myself in the sense of what, not ever who.
Hmm.
So I don't know if
Well,
that if we at the end, but this is to summarize to where
mm,
how I came to be what I am today, in a sense, even navigating my own complexities when it comes to trying to heal trauma. It's so
yeah.
much easier for some reason.
And there's no singular path forward with this. Obviously, I'm coming from the therapy side of things.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the side that says, sit down and talk with someone that's hopefully neutral and is going to listen as best as they can, and try to ask you questions that you may not know to ask yourself, or that nobody around you knows to ask. But the science is great. Love science. I quote scientific findings and statistics all the time. Sometimes it's a great place to start. It's a great grounding tool to use. But I come from the school of psychology that says true healing really comes in relationship. It
Mm.
comes from examining and engaging in the relationships in your life that are meaningful. Sometimes that is a therapeutic relationship. I've had clients who their experiences with the world have been so damaged and so torn apart that even just to step into a therapy office with a complete stranger is just like the most terrifying thing in the world. But it is such an important place to start. And
Mm.
if I can work with that person and say, okay, look, like everyone else in your life has hurt you. And I'm not even going to sit here and tell you that you should trust me, because maybe you shouldn't. Maybe the correct lens to look here is to say, yeah, maybe you shouldn't trust people because it's been that bad. But what if we looked at that? What if we examined what it was that happened, what it was you actually needed, and how we could slowly, very slowly, and very cautiously and mindfully begin to approach life with a different perspective if we
Uh,
tried some different things.
yeah.
You know, what if we looked at people as people? They are flawed. There are going to be healthy people and there's going to be unhealthy people, and then everywhere in between. You know, what if we got better at identifying and holding people accountable? What if we learned some skills in relationship that helps actually deepen them instead of holding up a delusion? A relationship where two people are trying to convince each other that we never have conflict, so everything's fine. That's BS. You need to have conflict to deepen a relationship. If you can engage in that conflict meaningfully, like it gets so much better. So healing happens in relationships. Ideally, I think the most powerful healing is in intimate partner relationships, however they tend to develop. But You can do it in friendships. You can do it with having really good, healthy friendships with people. You can do it with family sometimes. Sometimes you can't, and it's important. It's important. Sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
But if you can't, find the next things. Try to create the other relationships, and you can definitely do this in therapy. It can start in therapy.
Yes. Wow, Jeff, that's true. You paused me for a moment to hear, because it's
Mm.
true. Even this, everything that I just spoke about, the things that my practices, which are spiritual practices, the spiritual knowledge that I have found, it was through relationships, right?
Yeah.
Even the fact of being in a human body, to be here, well, with my own language, using my language, being a human, having this human experience.
Being human is hard. Being human is so hard. I talk about that all the time. It's like it's just hard to be here sometimes, and you just need to find ways to just get through it. You know.
Yes, yeah. I usually call having meaningful fun. That's what I love that idea, and I love
Yeah.
the questions. Yeah, gosh, Jeff, we're almost at the end. This we didn't talk about conscious spending, delayed gratification, generosity,
Ah,
and general
that's okay.
activity. All that those topics. But I do. I have to say, I would love for you to at the end of the conversation. What is your message about money? I love the way you talk about
Oh.
money and
Hmm.
yeah, tell me that would be a beautiful way to close this conversation.
Oh wow, on money. Oh boy. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not a financial advisor, but I do believe in my experience in supporting people in therapy has shown me that, well, coming through the lens of being a therapist and especially being a trauma therapist, your childhood trauma will show itself typically in three areas, right? It'll show itself in relationships, in your work, and in how you use your money. It's kind of an ironic system there, but
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah,
it to be the truth. Um, Typically, what your beliefs about the world, your beliefs about yourself, about relationships, will sometimes be reflected, not sometimes, almost always reflected in how you manage your money. And the reason why um, I started to focus on money with respect to my work with men was I started to just notice that, hey, first of all, money is deeply misunderstood. How we use money is deeply misunderstood. And that seems to be compounded by the problem that using money effectively is really, really hard. It is. It's not simple. It's complicated and it's messy, and it requires you, if you're going
yeah,
to do it well, it actually requires you to master a couple of tried and true therapeutic concepts that are really important for overall, psychological well-being. You got to delay gratification, and you have to tolerate frustration. You have to be able to actually, say, okay, look, I'm not going to go and take the big loan out to get that thing, and that I can't afford anyways, right? And I
right,
have to be able to tolerate, like, oh, maybe, I got to take the bus. I can't drive that fancy car right now. I need to do those things so that I actually can place money in places that are going to be more effective. Like I can save for retirement. I can't get over, how many people I talk to where they're like, "Oh, I'll figure that out when I'm 50." I'm like, "Really? Really? Like that's a bad plan."
yeah. Not a good idea.
But then it starts to make sense why they do that when I start to get to know them a little bit and I start to hear about their trauma. And like, first of all, they realize, oh, maybe my parents had no clue what they were doing with money. Maybe they racked up a whole bunch of debt. Like you didn't learn anything about it. You just learned to pursue instant gratification. So of course that gets reflected in your adult uses of money.
Right. And that's,
Mhm.
I love the questions you ask. So that caught my attention, the topic about money, mental health, masculinity.
Mhm.
And you say the questions to ask. So the mature masculine would ask questions like, what are
Mm.
you going to give back?
Mhm.
How are you going to help others achieve what you have? What
Mhm.
things would you want to dedicate your time, money, energy towards when you have more to give? So contribution, that has been my definition for success, for happiness. Anything has to do with the word wealthy has to me it's connected to giving, something that
Mhm.
benefits myself and others. Like these things that I do, writing these books, having these conversations here. That is just some that feels like success to me. That's how I
Mhm.
define success. Like, oh my God, this is amazing. Meeting all these
Yeah.
amazing people. I mean, it's just incredible to me,
Yeah.
enriching.
Something that I think is not just for men, I think true for all people, though I think that the masculine has a very interesting connection to this idea of Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette write about this concept of generativity, being able to act like not just being generous, like being generous is great. Be generous, be generous with your time, be generous with your money, be generous with your energy, like do all of that. But if you want to go one step further, if you're a man and you are actually wanting to really do a deep dive into this stuff, look at how effectively you are creating opportunities for other people.
Right.
What chances have you taken on a young guy in your business, in your career path? How much mentorship have you done? How willing are you to give of your wisdom, to a new generation of people coming up, instead of just trying to hoard it and say, no, 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 like I have to keep all of this for myself. It's like, no, like that's such a shallow way of approaching life and your passions. Like share it generously. Don't hoard
Yes.
onto it,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it becomes just so it's such a beautiful way to engage with your life when you recognize that people can benefit not just from your money, but just from you being you and sharing what you know. Do it as slowly, like, or and obviously as ethically and morally as you can. Don't put yourself in a guru position, obviously, but
Yeah.
but recognize that, yeah, listen, if you're one of the best times I ever had, a best example of this in my own life was just an old guy teaching me to use a chop saw. I was 18. I was working in a machine shop, and I had no clue what I was doing, no clue. And they were giving me all these power tools. And some guy thankfully saw me and was like, whoa, 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 hey, hey, like, hey, here's how we use this and we don't lose any fingers, It was a beautiful moment, and learning something that, I'm not saying I would have chopped my hand off, but I mean, but it was a great moment.
Yes. You see,
Hmm.
it's coming from the relationship to yourself, isn't it? A healthy relationship with self.
Hmm.
That sharing that you speak of. Wow. And wow, there's something else that you mentioned about money that was, I was laughing actually about this one. I think this is it's a podcast that you were listening to, and the host made a
Mm,
comment, and I think he or she said, the goal of owning your financial future is to achieve as much freedom as possible so you may retire early and live out to your remaining years on the beach drinking margaritas. And then
yeah.
I was laughing about that. Margaritas, what does it have to do with anything? And then, yes, you started exploring, right?
I mean, look, I'm not opposed to beaches. I'm not opposed to
Yeah, I love,
margaritas. Not,
right?
not at all. Like, absolutely. I think they are integral parts of wonderful self-care. They can be. But the question I was more asking in that moment was like, but like that's the end goal? Like that's it? Like really? Like how can that be it? How on earth can that be it? You've
Yes.
done all this work, you've worked all these hours, you've sacrificed all this. And to a certain degree, I can empathize with that man. I can empathize with that person who, you know recognize, okay, when is it my turn to relax and just sort of kick my feet up. I can absolutely empathize with that. But to label that as the absolute end point,
Right.
I don't even want to call it like, selfish, or any of those things. I wouldn't want to say that. I would just say you're cutting yourself off from so much more that could be there. There's so much more that you can do. Um, and to think that you're not capable of that is just, and maybe you just need to be shown. Maybe you just need to have someone that will be willing to kind of guide you when you've achieved that. I'm not quite there yet myself. Like, I'm still working on it, but I hope to be one day, and I hope that I'll be able to reach out to someone to say, like, help me in this area to be the most effective that I possibly can be with the financial freedom that I've created for myself. How do I give back? How do I make sure that I'm a good steward of this message and of this money and of this energy? It can be such a meaningful thing to do with one's life at the end.
Yes. Yes, a billion times to that. And that sounds very much like a spiritual intelligence. intelligent person speaking. I know I'm using my own terms, so that's what I call spiritual intelligence. So everything you
Mm,
speak of when it comes to,
well, maybe, I don't know.
yeah,
Just doing my best, I guess. Just,
yeah, wow, you are, yeah, yeah, you, well, yeah, doing your best from a wise place, from a very wise place.
Hopefully, time will tell, but that's my goal. My goal is to be trying to speak from that place.
Oh my God, Geoff, I can see that right now in this present moment. Everything, all this
Well,
throughout the
thank you.
conversation, you've been displaying that. So thank you. I
Well,
really appreciate your presence in our world, in our
well,
reality.
that touches me deeply. Thank you, Valeria. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. So we are at the end. So I'll have the end one more question to ask you,
Hmm,
and then we'll end for today.
okay.
What three experiences you wish everyone to have before they lose the body, before they die?
Three experiences. Oh
Yes.
man. May I speak to men in this?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Not that I'm trying to. Not that I don't want
Yes.
women to be hearing a message or anything, but I just the first experience would be the love of a good woman. I would wish that for all men. Um, Deeply, I wish that.
Yeah.
Secondly, is to know what it feels like to have accomplished something really, really powerful. Whether and when I say powerful, it doesn't have to be big. It could be you got your kid through high school, you know, but to have accomplished something that was meaningful to you, not just because you thought that you were supposed to do it.
Right. Right. Huh.
It's very broad, but I think it's important. And the third thing would be I would wish that any man listening to this, I hope that you have conquered something that scares you, that you have identified something in your life that you can look back and say, this thing that terrified me for so much of my life, I was able to look at dead in the eye and conquer it. Maybe I fell down 49 times and I got up 50. I wish that for everyone, because the feeling that you get on the other side of that is there is no price. There is no price to put on it.
Yes. Wow. How beautiful. Thank you so much again. You have so much to share from the heart. It's really, in again, from my perspective, is highly spiritual. That's what everything I do is all about. So it's living a meaningful life, fun but meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of bringing uh, people together, but in the sense of finding peace within our own selves. So, wow, everything you say is just kind of, yeah, it's exactly what
Mm.
all the spiritual teachings and knowledge I have in practices they go back to. So, thank you so much again for being you, Geoff. It's truly
Well,
beautiful. Thank you.
thank you for this opportunity. It's been wonderful, and thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And what's the best place to find more information about you besides the logos.ca?
For the time being, that's about it. I've been abstaining from social media for quite a while, though I've been
Yeah.
kind of getting the push that maybe I need to start it up again. But
Yeah.
so maybe that. But for the time being, the best way to connect is just through that website, thelogos.ca. Be very happy to respond to anyone that was moved by anything, or if there's anything that connected with them. That's the best place.
Yes. Thank you so much again, Geoff, and we'll talk soon. Bye for
Thank you
now.
so much. Bye.